Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be talking about the relationship between employee engagement, empathy, and fairness.
How many times have you heard that, when an employee is struggling at work or lacks engagement, you should adopt a benevolent management style, as if being nice is more important than being fair?
How many times have we been told that empathy means being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, which actually completely ignores the fact that you can't feel what someone else is feeling because you're not them.
But do these misunderstandings really mean that you don't need empathy to be fair, or that engagement doesn't depend on perceived fairness? So, empathy, engagement, and fairness, what's the story?
Let's start with the result every company is hoping for: unfailing engagement among all employees for the common good. In this case, the company's goals. And let's remember that engagement isn't possible if employees feel they're being treated unfairly.
Right. Engagement is underpinned by three pillars: adherence to the goal, the belief that your contribution can make a difference, and fair recognition. The last pillar, taken alone, constitutes a crucial key to cultivating engagement.
Yes. It highlights the importance for employees of feeling that the rewards obtained are commensurate to the efforts they've made. And it really is a feeling. It's about whether or not the person feels they've been fairly rewarded, in the broadest sense of the word, for their efforts.
In other words, perceived fairness is a prerequisite for engagement, a necessary condition which must be met, though it's not enough on its own.
It's hard to discuss fairness and justice without referring to John Rawls, who posits that a society is just when its laws do not favor or privilege certain people.
However, since it's easy to imagine a society which would sacrifice the benefit of a few to improve the benefit for all, Rawls adds that institutions must aim to preserve benefits for all, but also for each individual.
This leads to the importance of the system's legitimacy in the eyes of all, and the legitimacy of those who determine the rules. So, Rawls adds that the principles of liberty of thought and expression are fundamental conditions, as is the principle of equality of opportunity.
This is one of the reasons why Rawls argues that for a system to be legitimate, the least privileged people must be convinced that the system aims to improve their situation. It's a question of trust.
When you adapt all of this to companies, two ideas stand out. First, each employee must trust in the fact that the company, as an institution, is creating the conditions for justice and fairness. Second, each person's assessment of their situation as fair or unfair is a personal perception.
This perception can also be shared by a group of people who have come together because of a shared view of the situation, whether or not the facts support it.
Since the perception of fairness and trust is subjective and emotional for the most part, there are two things that must be done to impact it. First, you have to welcome the feeling without trying to change it. And second, you have to manage the signals you send to build trust.
We won't debate the decisions and principles required to foster individual and collective trust in this episode. So let's look more closely at the first prerequisite: accepting the feelings of individuals and groups of people as well as the entire workforce.
Accepting their feelings of fairness or unfairness is absolutely crucial to displaying real empathy, since empathy is not the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but the ability to do your best to make space for the feelings that others express and to understand them. As you can see, it's not about being nice. It's about meeting the other where they are and trying to understand whether or not they have been fairly rewarded.
To recap, since engagement depends in part on whether or not employees feel they have been treated fairly and justly rewarded for their efforts, and since the only way to know that feeling is through true empathy, in other words, the ability to make space for and accept their feelings, then it becomes clear that there can be no engagement without empathy. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short. Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.